Hello, everyone. Welcome to the Themis Spotlight series. My name's Ismail. I'm one of the co-founders of Lagrange. I'm joined here by Charles, head of ecosystem at ether.fi. Charles, thank you for joining. Do you want to give a little introduction?
Yeah, absolutely. Appreciate you having me. Head of ecosystem at ether.fi. We are a general on-chain DeFi services platform. Like to break us down in sort of three main categories that we target at the moment. And so that is savings, earning, and spending. On the savings side, we offer LRT products, which are liquid restaged tokens. These are an additional layer of yield, which sits on top of the base Ethereum staking yield called restaking. And that's where we're able to utilize that ETH to actually provide that security over towards other services beyond just the network itself. Aside from that, we have our liquid vaults. Those are essentially one-click deployment places for folks who are a little overwhelmed by DeFi and just want to get an extra source of yield. We have an active manager there that goes over all the different strategies on a daily basis and optimizes those, as well as our most recent and what we'll be talking about quite in depth during this chat here is our cash product. That's essentially our credit card, which is run by a non-custodial vault on chain, allows you to essentially deposit your LRT assets, borrow against them in a credit-like fashion. We facilitate that through an Aave market on chain, and you're able to actually settle and spend those USDC through Circle and Visa anywhere in the world.
That's fascinating. I remember the first time I think we met in person, Charles. It was Battery Park in New York. I think we had a coffee or a lunch or something. I remember you telling me about the cash product and how exciting I found it. I think this is really one of the first examples of an LRT protocol with a large existing DeFi system surrounding it, taking this very big step to bridging between this off-chain credit experience and kind of on-chain assets that users have within kind of the ether.fi DeFi ecosystem. What inspired you guys to build the product?
I think consumer in general, as we know, has fallen a bit by the wayside over the past few years. We've had a lot of dealings with the cleanup from bad actors in the space last cycle. And so we really haven't seen that conversion or resurgence yet that everyone had come to love and expect, although we have seen glistenings of it in perhaps meme coins and other sectors we've seen pop up this year. I would say in general, we've taken a different approach to others in using infrastructure to actually bootstrap our distribution and pivot over to consumer rather than the reverse. I think the interesting point about consumer in crypto is that you're essentially not only trying to capture lightning in a bottle, but you're almost leveraging it in the sense that you add in tokens and incentives, and it often creates these inverted V patterns that you see on charts in terms of user bases and general kind of captivity that you're able to experience. And so the way that we think about it is having our base assets that we push across different chains, different DeFi integrations, et cetera, has allowed us to build this community with holdings that they'd love to actually interact with in the real world, bridging that gap that we've seen others try with different debit card products and then other structures in the past. It really felt like the time was right now to integrate a lot of these pieces that have been advanced over the last couple of years in terms of on-ramping, off-ramping, user experience, et cetera, and really construct a next generation product.
That's one of the things I think I've really enjoyed about the conversations we've had. I've always felt that there's this interest that ether.fi has to embrace these novel infrastructure primitives in ways that allow consumer-facing applications to provide unique and differentiated features to users. This was one of the things that really drew us to work very closely with you guys with our coprocessor supporting the cashback program for the cash card. I'd love to know how you guys think through the use of the coprocessor in how the cashback program will work within ether.fi's cash product.
Absolutely. I think growing into the size and scale that we have, maturing our code base in terms of ossifying our smart contracts and decentralizing some of those core pieces has been top of mind for us. I think there are a couple different fronts we can approach that. I'd say in general, as of late, the community has gotten very tolerant of a lot of these off-chain mechanics, whether it be points or other systems that are calculated. And so working with Lagrange to essentially be able to retain some of this verifiability on chain is something that initially piqued my interest. And as we further explored kind of the tie-in, which we can get to later alongside the cash product, I felt like it was a great opportunity for us to re-highlight that narrative of why we're all here in the first place. And that's due to this sort of decentralized, verifiable system.
I think the point that you had about verifiability of incentives is very prescient. We've seen so many instances in the last several months over airdrop and incentive designs really creating either malaligned or very well aligned incentives for end users, where it has created these almost binary outcomes. And a lot of it, in our view, comes down to attributability. Whether or not the program is structured in a way that users understand how it works, and understand how the issuance was created, and they had the ability to witness and watch how that type of program was instantiated. And so that's why I think it's in many ways so interesting the work that Lagrange and ether.fi are doing together, because it takes, in my view, this idea of powerful on-chain consumer credit card experience with the cash product and is able to use ZK to enable this cashback experience where all of the proofs of the user's transaction volume can be used as part of claiming a reward or claiming their entitled rebates. How would you describe the architecture of the intersection of Lagrange and ether.fi currently?
I'd say one point I want to jump in on your last mention for on-chain points and incentive systems and mechanics. We've also seen with the continued duration of the chop/bear market, however you want to title it, a lot more of aggressive types of features being implemented by protocols to retain their capital. And so we've seen the extension of vesting schedules. We've seen the overqualification and hoops needed to jump through to actually earn these rewards at the end of the day. I think transparency has been one of the main pillars that we've always stood on. We were one of the first LRTs to actually offer withdrawals in actually opening up that ability to come and go. We've run all of our seasons in a very transparent fashion in terms of outlining, here's the structure of the rewards, here's how you qualify for them. And that's something we've done in season 4 here, even simplifying kind of what we've taken so far and really highlighting part of the AVS market that's starting to come online. And so I think this transition on Eigen from points over to real yield is something that will help satiate a lot of concerns that were raised, rightly so, by funds, whales, and other large and small depositors alike. So jumping over to the Lagrange side on the architecture, maybe we can start getting a bit into the actual joint product build out here as we've teased our audience long enough. But part of the reward system that we're planning on building out for cash on one of the initial iterations is centered around this idea of cash back that everyone is typically familiar with on credit cards. And so we've actually worked on a partnership with Scroll for our underlying infrastructure processor for the L2 transactions to enable 3% cash back based on any spending on the card. And so what we've been able to work on here, and I'll let you dive into more of the mechanics, is essentially bring this system from an off-chain one to on-chain due to the fact that all the transactions are verifiable on-chain and allow users to really create their own custom schedule as to how they'd like to interact with that cash back and effectively claim it on-chain.
Yeah, I think that was very well put. So from the Lagrange side, when we look at the ether.fi cash product, currently the transactions associated with a user's purchases are all recorded on Scroll's L2. And so because of that, for a user to be able to claim a cashback, they need to be able to prove the aggregate balance that they've spent over some period of time, and therein the amount of that balance that they should be able to redeem. And so with Lagrange's coprocessor, what we're able to do is to ingest, in effect, the entirety of the transaction space contained on Scroll, and particularly all of those transactions filtered by ether.fi as the main destination of where that transaction was spent for the cash flow. From there, we're able to prove in aggregate the sum for every given user over any period of time that the query should be run over, which means that multiplied by the rewards rate, we can prove that a user is eligible for a certain amount of cash back and allow that user to directly assert those proofs on chain themselves, which means that if you want to claim your cash back every day versus every week versus every month, you can do that. You can accrue those cashback rewards. You can interact and you can spend however you want, just as you would with your Web2 financial institution. And when the time is right, you can simply submit that proof that you've engaged in a certain amount of transaction volume and then claim that cashback. And what makes that interesting is that without ZK coprocessing in the situation, you wouldn't really be able to do this on chain. You'd have to accumulate and sum up balances, and you'd have to then subtract out the amount claimed at the point of a claim. It would be very messy and a very difficult logic, and it would be very gas intensive and expensive. With the ZK, you can simply run that function, zero knowledge, over the data of Scroll, and then you can prove that back either on L1 or on Scroll as part of the claim logic. And so this is, to my knowledge, I think one of the first times that a ZK coprocessor is meaningfully being used for a innovative on-chain financial product, specifically one that bridges both the off-chain world and the on-chain.
Absolutely. And I think to dive in here, another exciting aspect to discuss is the flywheel mechanics that we're able to tap into through Eigen's initial bootstrapping of the AVS ecosystem. I think from my position in working with a lot of these different AVSs, it's been a battle to find the right coordination between product market fit, revenue generation, as well as general utility added to the protocol. And so I think those are the three legs of the triangle where, similar to the blockchain trilemma, usually you only get 2 out of 3. What excites me so much about this partnership here is that I think we've truly solved for all three, because we're providing a more transparent utility to the users. We're able to actually generate fees in a meaningful way and pass those back through not only Lagrange, but also to our EES delegators, as well as on the last portion of putting together the product fit. We have an abundant use case here to actually continue exploring in terms of additional perks we could actually bring on chain, with being able to verify deployments, ownership of tokens, et cetera. And maybe that might be an interesting piece to dive into as well.
I think we'll dive into that in a minute, but one point that you said that I really want to highlight is that I believe is probably the first instance on top of EigenLayer of an LRT protocol working very closely with an AVS to build an integration that will be actually fee generating and revenue generating for the operators of that AVS. And what I think is exciting about this is to another of your points earlier about this shift away from points meta onto the concrete fee and revenue meta. This is a concrete step that the restaking ecosystem kind of is undertaking in, right? And with obviously ether.fi as one of the main demand generators, as well as one of the main supply side restake ETH providers, you guys really have a very unique position in being able to create that flywheel with an AVS like Lagrange. That's something that I think on a more meta level, I'm very excited about watching. And so to double click on another point that you mentioned a moment ago about other types of incentives, rewards, perks that users of ether.fi might be able to expect that might also touch Lagrange's coprocessor technology. I'd love to expand more on this.
Yeah, without teasing too much in the pipeline, there's quite a bit to come. I think Some of the perks that we've advertised more generally has been the different tier rates of cash back, as well as more interestingly, potentially the borrow rates on the Aave market. And so, depending on the card tier, membership tier that you apply for, we'll actually be able to, on a more fine tuned basis, craft that user experience, both from the reward side as well as from the lending side. And so we're hoping to take this sort of membership idea and continue to work with our dozens of DeFi partners in enabling more of those features that are tailored to each one of our partners and effectively unlock new use cases and new utility for those card owners. And so I think when you look at the last generation, there were a lot of mechanics about locking tokens for additional yield. There were other mechanics about different kind of perks that you would earn off chain, such as called airline tickets or conference tickets, etc. But I think the real fun is really tying these two worlds together because it's all about having the off-chain experience on-chain and having some of the uniqueness of the on-chain experience off-chain. And so that's what this whole kind of partnership in terms of where we can go from here is all about.
I think that's very well put. I think specifically, there's so much data that is accrued on chain as part of kind of this ether.fi DeFi ecosystem, all the way now from the user's consumer spending habits, all the way to where their positions are put within ether.fi's vaults, all the way to which assets they hold and which AVSs are supported in generating yield on top of the core product. And so across all of that, you create is this functionally multi-chain data lake of ether.fi's DeFi ecosystem. And the same way that you would structure computation of your data lake if you were a TradFi financial institution, with Lagrange, we really hope to be able to provide that same type of customization on chain to a user's financial experience within this DeFi, ether.fi ecosystem based on their other interaction. And I think that is something that will really take hold this year as both the compute that we offer and then the ether.fi products continue to expand in their reach and scope. So shifting gears for a minute, I'd love to chat a little bit more about some of the interesting things coming down the pipe for ether.fi this year. What's next for you guys? What are you guys excited about, both in terms of restaking and then in terms of the broader ecosystem that you're developing?
Yeah, absolutely. I would say one area of initiatives we've been expanding is broadening the asset base of our LRTs. Just in the past month or so, we've launched eBTC and eUSD, which are effectively restaked versions of Bitcoin and stablecoins. What's interesting about that is we're able to take all of the hard work we've done, both on the node operator curation portion, as well as the partnership front with AVSs, and effectively offer new types and utility of economic security out to those AVSs. And so I can maybe give a couple of predictions here. On the Bitcoin side, we've seen a lot of inherent demand given that there is no base yield to capture. Part of what we've uniquely crafted here is in partnership with Lombard, all of our base asset BTC is actually already accruing Babylon yield before it gets restaked. And so we've been able to bring this essentially dual yielding Bitcoin to market. And I've seen great demand both from DeFi protocols as well as investors alike. Where I see that really fitting in is the fact that due to this lower hurdle rate, as well as abundance of Bitcoin capital, we may see eventually economic security shift towards Bitcoin due to the fact that costs should be lower there on that market. Similarly, I think eUSD plays an interesting role in that a lot of these complex mechanics behind offering economic security can often be boiled down to a different set of functions or ratios to determine the minimum threshold needed to ensure functionality of that system. And so Where I think this plays in is perhaps maybe not in as dominant a role as Bitcoin or ETH may, but having a non-volatile asset where you can effectively have a minimum threshold of economic security captured at all times should give more resiliency to these AVSs in running at the scale which they need to. And so those are two areas which will be continuing to expand over the next few months. I think there's always the bread and butter of chasing the next L1 launches and L2 launches and finding the right fit on retention on those ecosystems. A big portion of my day is actually going to not the attraction of liquidity, but finding the real use cases that our users can get excited about and figuring out why they'd be interested in bridging and staying in a new ecosystem. And then beyond that, on the liquid front as well, it's continuing to roll out new partner vaults dedicated to specific ecosystems, specific protocols, and continuing that simplification of DeFi for the masses so that we can really reach scale.
I really like that vision. And I think the point over the hurdle rate on BTC staking is very interesting. One of my favorite statistics is that the supply side APY of WBTC and Aave is 9 basis points. Like there is very little places in crypto where the cost of capital on something is as low as it is on WBTC. And I can imagine that as we further financialize BTC, especially with base yield on something like Lombard, it reaches this kind of future state that you can see AVSs predicating themselves on a very diverse group of assets that underpin them with an eigenlayer. I think the permissionless staking that eigenlayer has added recently as well really opens the gates for potentially even rebalancing assets that are contained within kind of an AVS's security profile, wherein if the cost of capital shifts materially on USDC versus ETH versus BTC, you can draw or increase the relative proportion to those assets, assuming a relative price stability on that.
I think jumping in just on the DeFi portion, not to get off track here, but I think users will be shocked at the fact that there are, due to those looping mechanics of how cheap WBTC is to borrow, better yields at the moment on a lot of BTC-Fi products over ETH. And you also have the inherent lower volatility on Bitcoin and dominance factor that continue to trend up. So I do think BTC finance will continue to find its way over the coming quarters where we saw a bit of burst earlier this year with Bitcoin L2s that seems to have faded a bit. And, once again, the focus is going more so on the product than on the consumers.
I love that. And from the Lagrange side, I think this year is going to be very big as well for kind of the adoption of zero knowledge proofs and zero knowledge technology within marquee DeFi, NFT, and infrastructure protocols. I specifically think that we're reaching a stage in the adoption cycle where the core technology is performant enough to be used for real use cases, just like we're talking about with the cashback program for the cash card. And I think when you start marrying these questions over these heavily data generating products on cheaper execution spaces than ever with low cost of capital for core mechanisms like Lagrange's prover network, you're able to get to these final state products that have very low capital costs and are able to deliver very unique utility to application builders. And I'd even go so far as to say that the availability of risk capital for builders of application level products is only increasing in the space. Capital markets are favoring DeFi protocols, NFT protocols, consumer facing protocols, more so than they're facing the nth iteration of infrastructure. And so that funding environment coupled with just raw improvements in the underlying technology in ZK, I think creates just this very interesting melting pot of interesting projects that can be built on top of ZK.
I couldn't agree more. I think in terms of the general restaking layer that Eigen has unlocked for the ecosystem as a whole, being able to really bring a lot of these off-chain services back on-chain will effectively create the next blossoming of robust services that will last in the timelines that a lot of us think crypto was meant to function in, which is decades or longer. And of course, we'll always have the continuous iteration of the underlying mechanisms, code bases, and structures. But the more that we can really solidify the resilience of this across the stack, I think will open up a really broad set of use cases where, not to get too far into predictions, but I think it'll be interesting when we actually have AI agents on chain that are able to procure some of these resources through payments and will effectively be able to set up and manage these services themselves fully on chain and automate that process.
I love that. And segueing to a conclusion here, tell me one hot take that you have related to either restaking or DeFi going into 2025.
Absolutely. I think the main hot take here, just because I've heard very little people push back on me when we talk about here the points meta so much. The actual revenue generation and real yield portion of Eigen will, greatly surprise estimates to the upside. I think we've seen a general sentiment based around, calculating some of the Eigen emissions, helping to subsidize that market. Looking past sort of these initial bootstrapping phases, I think we'll be able to hit at least 50% or higher of the ETH staked yield in total kind of fee capture through this extra layer. And so I think restaking will be accepted amongst institutions, given we can properly manage the slashing risks that come with the set of AVSs we structure and delegate towards. But I think with that will come this next set of growth, which we're able to see across perhaps restaking involved in an ETF. We'll see.
Oh, I love that. A restaking ETF with real yield in ETH. I think that is the end state that a lot of projects are working for. And I think some of the work that we're doing, obviously, to create real yield paid through Lagrange ZK Coprocessor to stakers and operators through real utility within ether.fi's protocol is a fantastic concrete step in that direction. Charles, thank you so much for joining us on the Themis Spotlight series, and excited for all the great stuff coming this year from ether.fi and ether.fi alongside Lagrange.
Absolutely.